Hi, welcome, everyone. We're going to wait 1 minute to make sure everyone in the waiting room gets in.
Should we stop sharing the screen, Carol? Just 1 second, for a few minutes, if you don't mind.
Sure. I didn't realize it was being shared. Oh, yeah, there it is.
Well, that's what I see. I don't know if
Oh, yeah, I do
everybody
see
else
it.
can see that.
Yeah, so could we just have some introductory remarks first, Carol? We want to see everyone.
There you go.
And Ken, your hand is up already. Did you mean for it to be up?
I'm sorry.
It's like right to business.
All right, admit. I am going to take a minute just because your hand is up, Ken. I bet you we're going to cover whatever you're asking, but go ahead.
All right. Well, I just wanted to ask if you have decided to share the results of the last survey with us. I
We
think
are
it's
going to.
really important that so many people have spent so much time working on this task force. We spent a lot of time working on our responses to make them thoughtful and in depth on the survey. And we'd like to see the results.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, we're going to talk about that briefly today.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the New Jersey Forest Task Force. Today's topic is going to be proposals on deer management, but a couple of things before we get started. A number of you have asked us about the framework. We did do 3 revisions and we have those results and we have the comments and we're going through them now. And although we won't be sending out another survey as we expand some of the recommendations based on the comments that we received, we will be sharing the framework before the finalization of the report. Also on the report in general, we do want to reflect the opinions of everyone that has had a voice throughout these past several months. So as we draft up the final report, check your emails. That's how we'll be communicating with people. So for instance, if there was an issue on which you feel you want to document your agreement or your opposition to a particular topic, you will have that opportunity. And the way we're going to do it is via email. So let's see, did I miss anything, co-chairs, on the procedure for moving forward on the framework and the final report?
I don't think so. Thumbs up from Anjali.
Andy's here. I don't see him, but he's here.
He was having trouble getting unmuted. Did he get
Yeah,
unmuted?
I think Eileen, you have to make Tom and Andy co-hosts. Sorry.
You got me. Thanks, Eileen. No, I think you covered everything. Yeah. Is Eileen frozen?
Oh, she might be.
I
I
think
don't
she's
even
frozen.
see Eileen.
Yeah, she hasn't moved for like 30 seconds. So.
Okay, we'll give her a minute to come back in.
Yep.
Okay.
She's going and coming
So
back.
while we're waiting for Eileen to come back, obviously we're talking about deer today. And we're going to, similar to yesterday, we're going to start out with a little bit of background information from the DEP on the issue. And then we're going to move into a number of proposals that we received on this issue and see if we can identify any areas of broad agreement where we could potentially refine the language that we have currently in the framework around deer management.
Okay, I'm back, Tom. I'm so sorry, my internet went down.
No problem. I just ran through for everyone kind of what our plan is for today. So
Great.
So you could probably proceed with the introductions.
Okay.
Introduction of our DEP speaker or speakers.
Okay. All right, great. So thank you, John Cecil, who people have heard from before. And with us today,
Oh, I think we might have just lost.
Steve?
Oh, there you go.
Am
You're
I
back.
gone
Now. You
again?
froze again. You're
Oh,
back.
okay. Did you hear I said, so Carol Stanko, my internet connection is unstable. I'm going to stop the video, but hopefully you can hear me all right, right? Okay, so Carol Stanko, she is the chief of the Bureau of Wildlife Management, and she manages the Deer Project. The Deer Project collects and disseminates information on the state's deer resources, and they implement programs like the division's community-based deer management permit program for the management of suburban deer. So with that, I believe Carol has a presentation that she's going to share. And then we'll open it up for questions when she has finished. Carol?
I certainly do. Everyone can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Great. I'd like to thank you all for inviting me here to speak today to give you some facts about deer management in New Jersey. A little bit about me. I've been with the agency since, painful to admit, 1997. Had no intention of ever working with deer, but the universe had different ideas for me. And since my senior year at Rutgers, where I got my degree, I have been pretty much exclusively working with deer. Many years on the deer research project myself, first as Northern Region biologist, then as deer project leader. And in 2014, I stepped up into the bureau chief position. So I am now responsible for all the problem species in New Jersey, not only deer. I can talk for a full 2 hours by myself on deer. It's a complicated issue. So I would ask that you hold your questions till the end, and I'd be happy to answer any of them. Now, let me share my screen again. Do you have it? Yes, great. Okay. Come on, advance. There you go. So you can't tell where you're going unless you know where you've been. So a little bit about history of deer management in New Jersey, and folks are always stunned to know how long deer have been managed in New Jersey. Whenever I throw this slide out at a presentation, I'll ask the audience to guess what year we manage, and they are woefully late. So I'm sure you will all be surprised that our first deer season was on the books in 1771. That's not the first hunting regulation. That came before that as far as licensing goes. And deer were a commodity back then. There was no regulation prior to that first deer season. And when we Europeans arrived on the scene and proceeded to settle the continent, we overharvested deer to the point of near extirpation, not just in New Jersey, but really in all the original 13 colonies. In fact, it's hard to believe, but in the early 1900s, if you saw a deer, it actually made the newspaper. That's how rare they were. So the season was closed down for 6 years. We restocked early in the 1900s, and by the late 1950s, we reached carrying capacity with deer statewide. Yay, a success story. Who knew that we'd grow to be the most densely populated state in the nation? So back in the old days, we managed deer with biological carrying capacity. So the number of individuals of a population that the habitat can sustain in good health. Now, and for quite some time, we managed for the most part with cultural carrying capacity, and that is the number of animals tolerated by humans. So how did we get here? The most densely populated state in the nation. We created deer habitat, lack of hunter access, we have intentional and unintentional feeding of deer, we have elimination of top predators, we have high reproductive rates. And a minute on the high reproductive rates. You know, normally an adult doe in an upland situation, a 1.5-year-old doe, will give birth to one fawn at a 1.5 years. Here in New Jersey, where there's so much natural and horticultural and agricultural foods available, we have fawns breeding at 6 months, and they'll give birth to a single fawn. That yearling doe will now give birth to twins, and triplets are not uncommon in older age class does. So you have exponential population increases. So modern deer management Regulated hunting is our largest tool. The state is broken up into 50 some odd deer management zones. The different colors that you see on the map are zones that are grouped together by the same season dates and bag limits. Our most restrictive regulations that we call them, those groups of zones, our most restrictive is 3 months long. Our most liberal is 5 months long and has unlimited antlerless bag limits, which means you target the females because those are the breeders. If a hunter wanted to take 1,000 deer, it's fully within his purview to do that. So we try to give as many tools as we can to hunters throughout the state. And here's what our population looks like versus our harvest. The blue line is our population estimate. The pink line is our harvest. Our all-time highs were in the mid-1990s, and we reduced that specifically through regulations like earn a buck. So a disclaimer on the population estimate, that is an estimate of the huntable portion of the herd, because every population estimator is a mathematical equation that extrapolates off of a sample. The sample we extrapolate off of is the hunter harvest, and obviously we have deer in places where we are not harvesting them, so they're not counted. So this is an underestimate of the total deer population in the state. This is a magazine put out by the National Deer Association, and we can see that our regulations are doing what we intended, because those two circles, it's the top 5 states, one for antlerless harvest per square mile. New Jersey is listed there, and also the top 5 states for antlerless deer per antlered buck harvest, and New Jersey is also there. So we may have fewer hunters participating, but they're taking more deer each these days. So we also have to manage New Jersey's farmland. What tools do they have? Well, farmers and their immediate families do not have to buy a hunting license for the property on which they reside. And they also get free deer hunting permits. So, you know, your immediate family could be mom, dad, children, grandparents, aunts, uncles, etc. However many people live in that house can hunt that property for free. They also get free depredation permits, and those are for agricultural damage. They can put as many as 10 agents on to shoot deer. We let them keep some of those deer if they desire. It's usually outside of the hunting season, and they do have to prove that they have damage to their crops. In addition to those two things, we also have other assistance for landowners. We have a community-based deer management program. So those are permits that are issued through the Fish and Game Council. It's been in place since 1995, because as far back as then, we recognized and council recognized that regulated hunting may not be practical in all areas of the state. So this program provides for other options, hunting outside of the regulated hunting season and using regulations that are outside of regulated hunting, such as shooting across roadways, different season dates, different bag limits, the use of different weaponry, the use of silenced guns with permission of the county prosecutor, things like that. It also allows for research, and we've used it for research for many years. The applicants are limited to municipalities, counties, county boards of ag, and airports. So we get participation in this program annually since its inception. We also have something called the Deer Management Assistance Program, or DMAP. And this is for landowners in those regulation sets that are more restrictive, that have shorter season lengths or lower bag limits. And this enables the purchase of additional permits for the harvest of antlerless deer only. So, challenges to deer management. Well, Like I said, who thought that New Jersey, the Garden State, would turn out to be the most densely populated state in the nation? I'm sure many of you have seen this animation before out of Rutgers. That red tide there is us. It's developed land. So while deer don't seem to mind developed land that much, they are very adaptable and are perfectly happy living in and amongst us. It precludes us from management. We're often not allowed on those properties to manage deer by hunting or any other option. So access to deer, biggest challenge in the state of New Jersey. I'm going to talk about some experimental or suggested methodologies. I'm not doing this to preempt speakers that are coming on after me whatsoever. These are just topics that I normally discuss at every deer presentation that I give. In fact, I did not have to make any new slides for this presentation. I've done this so many times and discussed these topics so many times, literally for my entire tenure at the agency. So these have been discussed and inquired about from all audiences. So I'm going to be going over fertility control and also commercialization of venison. So as far as fertility control goes, and I borrowed this and another slide from Dr. Larry Katz of Rutgers University, Fish and Wildlife has been involved in research on fertility control for longer than I've been with the agency, and I'm going on 27 years. So we are open to that. We continue to be open to experimentation and research on that. We're waiting for that magic bullet, pun intended. So this is his slide that he gave at a presentation on deer management, a seminar that I hosted several years ago. So things to consider about fertility control: efficacy, reversibility, delivery system, and time to desired effect. So efficacy is more for the chemical variety of fertility control, contraception, if you will. And people seem to be steering away from that a little more these days and going towards sterilization, which I'll also talk about. But the state of New Jersey actually is licensed to use a chemical called Gonacon. It's, I think, one of two that are actually licensed for use in wild deer. We were one of 3 states at the time. I don't know if anyone else has joined on the bandwagon to license it. We chose to license it here for captive situations, and I'll tell you why. In research done in New Jersey by Dr. Anthony DiNicola of White Buffalo, using Gonacon, we found that it has a 70% efficacy rate. So 30% of your adult does continue to breed, and you are not allowed to use it in female fawns. So in problem areas, and those are areas obviously with good habitat and lots of food sources, between 40 and 60% of your female fawns are breeding. When I ran the numbers using real world reproductive rates for those areas, you're seeing a 29% increase in the population if you were lucky enough to treat 100% of the females on site, which is virtually impossible. And that doesn't account for immigration as well. So obviously this would need to be used in conjunction with lethal methodologies. We have not used it in New Jersey. Like I said, it's for those island populations or captive populations, think zoos and farms and things like that, where it would have the best effect. They did use, I believe, PZP on Fire Island in New York with success. Again, it's an island in the ocean and it has no roadways. So they did have some success with that there, no immigration. So reversibility, yeah, you might not really worry about that, but if you had something catastrophic come through at some point in time, you'd be asking yourself how to get a population back. We can't even conceive of that these days with all the deer we have on the hoof, but it's always out there. Delivery system for the chemical stuff is not perfect. You have to hand inject, which means you have to capture each and every animal, hand inject into a major muscle mass. You have to ear tag them. So you know which does got contracepted, and then you have to put a do not consume label on them as well in case somebody wanted to consume them. Now you can boost the efficacy in Gonacon by literally by boosting it the following year, giving a follow-up shot, but you know, it's you have to go through that effort of recapture. It's not like you could send a postcard from the doctor's office, ladies, it's time for your annual, please come in so you can get your shot. It is a major outlay of effort, and because of that, you're talking at least $800 an animal. So who pays for this, right? And desired time to effect, which I'll get to later. Great slide from Dr. Katz on that. So Cornell did a study on sterilization, which is physical, it's not chemical, and it's permanent. Cornell University, the perfect free-ranging laboratory, if you will. They have their own police force, they have their own veterinary college. They are virtually a town in and of themselves, so they can control parameters that we really can't control in the real world. They found that the costs were, and this is quite some time ago, this probably took place 10 to 15 years ago, this study. So those were the prices back then. It's really expensive for those last 10% because the law of diminishing returns, you have to really up your effort to catch those last deer. They chose to use tubal ligations, which is smart in that they targeted the female deer, the breeders, but tubal ligations meant that the does continued to come into estrus. They continued to cycle. So the amount of fawns that weren't born were offset by the number of additional males that immigrated into the area to breed these fawns in estrus. So they wound up with more deer than they started with. And I got these great quotes from the head investigator, Dr. Paul Curtis, when he delivered his presentation at the Northeast Deer Technical Committee, on which I used to sit. Communities should avoid non-lethal methods as they show little promise in areas where deer can move freely on the landscape. Again, I talked about an island or a closed population. And fertility control means managing deer with cars. So then we jump to Staten Island, where Dr. Tony DiNicola of White Buffalo again did a study on vasectomizing bucks. So it was 3 years initially. It started in 2016. It was a nice project for him, 4.1 to start. The first year saw a 232% increase in deer vehicle collisions. Why? Again, you're treating the males, so the females don't get pregnant and start coming into estrus every month. So those of you who live in New Jersey know that there's warnings about the rut every year because that is the season, the mating season, where it is most dangerous on roadways, because that's when deer are running around willy-nilly, not paying attention to traffic, and that's when you see your most deer vehicle collisions. Well, what they did here was cause an extended rut. He didn't mention that though. He just calls it a success because the population decreased. Well, it did. Because they killed them with cars instead of guns. He also didn't mention how many of these bucks actually swim over to New Jersey. You'd be surprised to learn that every year we find bucks with his ear tags in around the Staten Island area because it's not a large waterway and they do swim over. So again, we would consider this experimental and not management because there are so many questions that haven't been answered on things like deer behavior, mortality, population dynamics, and biology on a population level scale. So again, not what we would consider management. This is the slide I referenced from Dr. Katz, and it's really telling if you're a visual person like I am. So across the bottom, the x-axis is the number of years, the y-axis is your population size. The different colors are the contraception rate. So you could see that gray silver bar, and I don't know if you could see my cursor, this bar here is 100% contraception rate, which is virtually impossible to capture each and every female on the landscape. Even if you manage to do that by some miracle, it would take at least 10 years to see a significant decline in population. Lesser, say 75%, which is still pretty darn good. That's the blue one. Now you're going out, 17 years before you see a significant decline in population. Because if you're not using lethal methodologies, you are waiting for them to die of old age or get struck by cars, which is hardly humane. Okay, we did have a proposal to overrectomize does in Saddle River, which is up in Bergen County several years ago. And in doing my due diligence, reviewing the application and looking through the literature, I found a study that said that female deer that aren't pregnant and who don't have fawns with them have a home range that is 52% larger. What does that mean? It means that they are roaming further on the landscape, and that increases your potential for deer vehicle collisions. Saddle River happens to be adjacent to New Jersey Route 17, which is a major highway. So that wasn't the only reason that application was denied, but certainly that was a major concern of ours. We certainly don't want to endanger any human lives by increasing deer vehicle collisions. Okay, then there's the sale of venison. This gets brought up perennially as well. So a couple of things to consider. So we have some of the most liberal regulated hunting seasons in the country. Why doesn't it work? 80%, about 81%, the last time I looked it up, of New Jersey is in private land ownership. And those private lands are broken up into small pieces. So it's a giant jigsaw puzzle. We know that open space and state land, for the most part, is open to deer hunting. We have no idea how much private land is open to deer hunting. But we do know that overabundance and even regeneration is much less of an issue on wildlife management areas that are all open 100% to deer hunting than on some other areas in the state. So what prevents landowners from allowing access to their properties right now? Why should I let a stranger on? They don't trust strangers. Quite honestly, I wouldn't want strangers on my property either. There's fear of liability. They think they're going to get sued. There is misconceptions and fears about firearms and even archery equipment. Everything you hear about firearms in the news these days are all horrible incidents, and they equate guns with that. And nothing could be further from the truth. Hunting is very safe. So what is going to make these landowners open their property to hunting, or I should say culling, for money? So then there are logistical challenges as well. We have an excellent program in the state called Hunters Helping the Hungry, whereby deer hunters donate an entire deer carcass to these few butchers, and they process the meat, and it gets distributed to food programs throughout the state for the needy. So always the limiting factor in this program is not money, it's the butchers, because these butchers have to have New Jersey Department of Health inspections. So that's a thing. They have to have a certain setup. I just learned this year they have to have 3 sinks. Who knows why? If the butchers already exist and they're doing domestic agricultural animals, they have to have an entirely separate line for wildlife. So they either have to run 2 lines, double their production capacity, or they have to break down the entire line, sterilize it when they do deer, and then sterilize it again when they go back to agricultural animals. So doing a program with this is asking for these small businesses to outlay a significant amount of money. And that goes to my second point, who even has determined that there is a market for this farmed venison? Yes, there is farmed venison in the world right now. It doesn't come from New Jersey. It's corn-fed, like cattle is corn-fed. I hear people saying, oh, I don't like lamb, it tastes gamey. What does gamey mean? It means that it doesn't taste like corn-fed beef, which is what we're all used to consuming if we're carnivores. I could even taste the difference between grass-fed beef and corn-fed beef. So the venison that you get in the wild, not going to taste like farm-raised venison. Yes, we do have some locavores out there who are interested in consuming venison, and they are actually coming into hunting. There may be some people who try it out of curiosity, but is there a sustainable market for this product to begin with? Then there's landowner liability and landowner conflict. You are now making these deer a commodity. You're going to pit landowners against each other. Deer aren't trees. They don't stay on one person's property. You're not allowed to fence them in. So that's going to be an issue, we believe. Also, before I go back to that, safety is an issue. You know, I looked online to see what the price of farm-raised venison was like, and actually there's a farm in Pennsylvania that sells this stuff, and the cheapest cut is chopped meat, and that is $7.99 a pound. So we estimate that you get about 40 pounds of meat out of your average deer, so that comes out to $319.60 a deer. But it's more, obviously, if you're doing like loin chops, that's $44 a pound for loin chops. And other cuts are different prices as well, steaks and things. So hunters have to go through hunter safety course. They are taught safety, they are taught ethics, they are taught shot placement, you know, all these things to make safe, ethical kills. Now you're putting a price tag on these animals. People may be less inclined to be as safe as they once were. They might be more inclined to take a shot that's kind of pushing the envelope, because you have a deer walking by you that's worth, you know, maybe $400-500 now. It's a different mindset. So we think safety in the most densely populated state in the country would also be an issue. And then, of course, there's the North American model of conservation, which this would go against. This is the most successful model of wildlife conservation in the world, as opposed to European countries whereby the Lord owns the wildlife that's on his estate. Well, we went away from that when we got our freedom over 200 years ago, and it's worked for us. So we don't believe that this is the way to go. It would also require legislative change to statute if you were to go down this path. Okay. I just wanted to show you guys this. This is on our wildlife management area. That is a deer exclosure a couple of years after we did a cut without changing hunting regulations to deer at all. And it's not in our most liberal deer hunting regulation set. You can't even tell the difference between the inside and the outside, and that's because we open the canopy up to sunlight. So, call to action. Here's what we're doing as an agency. We are simplifying our regulations. I like to compare deer regulations to an old house. And that's what it was, because when we first started hunting deer, it was males only. You had a 6-day week that you could hunt males only, and that was the only deer season. And then over time, as the population grew, we added different seasons onto it and different regulations until it's an old house with a bunch of rooms that don't quite make sense and aren't easy to use anymore. So we're in the process of simplifying our regulations for R3, recruitment, retention, and reactivation. So we know that, you know, kids have a lot of other activities that they partake in these days. They don't necessarily grow up with hunting anymore, so we have a lot of competition. We want to retain the hunters that we do have, and we want to bring back the hunters that may have lapsed. So we have something called a churn rate in licensed sales, not just in New Jersey. People fall in and out every year. And the reduction in licensed sales also is not unique to New Jersey. It's nationwide, and they've been reducing about 2% a year for quite some time. We did see a boost in licensed sales for archery since 2009 when we instituted crossbows. We reduced the safety zone for archery, and the legislature introduced Sunday hunting on wildlife management areas and private properties. So that really re-energized a lot of bow hunters. We are also doing more deer outreach to property owners, those properties, large landowners that act as deer refugia. And thanks to the largesse of the New Jersey Farm Bureau, who lobbied in our behalf and got us a position and funding for an outreach biologist, we are starting this program up. And it's just in its infancy. I could use an army of these folks to work in New Jersey. But it's a start, and we're off on a good track there. So what can you all do then? Well, obviously, if any of you are landowners or managers, please open your properties to the fullest extent of the law. Some people open it for shorter periods of time. They are afraid it's going to conflict with other recreational activities, but this is a management activity. I tell people it's like plowing snow or mowing the lawn. This is something that needs to be done every year if you want to maintain your lands in good health. And you have to manage your hunters. Make sure that they are taking antlerless deer and not bucks. If they're not taking antlerless deer, boot them off. Don't charge them more money. They're already buying permits and licenses to perform a service for you. So please don't discourage them by charging them even more money. Just open your land to deer hunting. You know, people are afraid that if you announce that your property is open, you'll get thousands of people showing up. Hunters self-regulate. They don't want to be in competition. They don't want to be within eyesight of another hunter. You know, it works out. Or if you have to sell a number of permits, not sell, issue. You can do that to manage your numbers. There's ways to do it. And support legislation that supports deer management and oppose legislation that impedes it. So let's see, the first one allows Sunday hunting on federal military properties, which is something that was originally omitted from that language back in 2009, unfortunately, and they've been trying ever since to get that. The second one is another bill that has been around, I want to say at least 10 to 15 years. We've been trying to get this one through. It permits certain deer control activities like depredation permits for forestry work. If you cannot meet your forestry goals, of a forestry management plan, you can get a depredation permit to take deer. It prohibits feeding, which is huge. I always encourage townships that are having issues to put an ordinance in that bans feeding. This is different than baiting. Baiting is necessary in a small state that's broken up into those little properties. You need to draw the deer onto where you can harvest them. But feeding, totally not necessary. So those are two good ones that are out there right now. And then there's others where you wouldn't think have anything to do with deer, right? This establishes sensitive areas in which possession of a firearm is prohibited. But guess what? They listed state, county, and local parks. And that would probably include wildlife management areas. This would virtually shut down deer hunting in the state. So things like this need to be pointed out to legislators so they can fix them. If you agree with the rest of the bill, that's fine. But this one section not good for deer management. So things like these are the kind of stuff that you need to be aware of and to reach out to your legislators on. Support appropriations from the legislature for Hunters Helping the Hungry. Again, great program. And how does that help take more deer? Well, hunters, we have a wanton waste law, so you can't just shoot an animal and leave it in the field to rot. You have to utilize that animal. Well, once a hunter's freezer is full and they've given away as much as they can to friends and family, they're going to stop hunting. This provides an opportunity and an avenue for them to donate those animals, and it's a win-win. You're feeding the needy in New Jersey and you're taking more deer off the hoof. So that is something that would greatly be appreciated. And I believe that's all I have. I'm not sure how long I went, but happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Carol. That was very informative. So if you could stop sharing your screen, we would like to get into some questions. I'm sure people have some clarifying questions for you. So if you do have a question for Carol, please raise your hand. We'll take a few before we go into the proposal. So Julia, I see that your hand is up.
Thank you very much. Carol, hi. I'm Julia Summers. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Highlands Coalition. And our participation in this task force is really driven by our concern about public forests in the Highlands. So that's where my questions are coming from. Could you share with me what you think a sustainable level of the deer population in the Highlands, particularly on our public lands like our wildlife management areas? How many deer per acre do you think that we can sustainably support?
A very famous question, very common question. How many deer should I have on my property? That,
Well, on
There is-
our public lands, not on our private property.
right, yeah, there is no answer to that because it depends on the history of that property, the amount of damage that was there, what the seed bank looks like, what the land use is, what the past land use is. Was it farmed? Was it burned? Was it tilled? I mean, you know, how much damage is there?
Are you
There's-
familiar with Dr. Jay Kelly's research?
Yes, I am. And he never equates that to if the land is hunted and to what extent. So
I think it's would be fair to say that he's been looking at the deer population and what the impacts on our forests are. And
yes,
for many of us, we're concerned that there are way too many deer on our public lands right now.
I
because of the
understand. But
damage.
are those lands open to hunting is the question.
We're talking
And-
about wildlife management areas.
Oh, wildlife management areas. I mean, as I said, we have looked at our wildlife management areas and we have better regeneration than most properties because we are open to the full extent of the hunting season, which is probably 5 months long up in most of the northern part of the state.
Well, you might be surprised to know that there are a lot of people here who disagree with you.
I'm
That-
sure that's why
that
we're
we
here.
think that we think our wildlife management areas are seriously overbrowsed by deer, and there needs to be a great increase in the deer cull on our public lands, including our wildlife management areas. That is why we're here,
Yeah.
And
and that's
Okay,
why we were interested to know. So thank you very much for sharing that information because it gives me a better idea of what we should be talking about.
Okay, we're going to move. These are good questions and we're going to hear more like this, I think. Margaret Wood, you have your hand up. You're next.
Yeah, I have a question about selling of deer meat. Is it true that only ranch-raised animals can receive USDA certification? So that hunted animals could never be USDA certified? Next question. Is it ever legal to sell hunted deer meat? And if it's not legal, could you have charity dinners where the meat is served for free, but there's an entrance fee to get into the door as part of the charity function? Thank you.
okay, so the first question, I'm sorry, could you rephrase? Could you tell me the first question again?
Is it true that only ranch-raised
Okay,
animals
yeah. All
can
right.
receive
got it.
USDA certification?
Well, yeah, how would the USDA be able to certify wild animals? Agriculture is very highly regulated, inspected. And when you put a deer on a ranch, you're taking away all the health benefits of wild deer too, because now they're going to be injected with hormones.
Looks like Carol froze. That's just me.
Yeah. Carol, I thought it was me.
All right.
Hey, John, maybe, do you know where Carol was going with that until she comes back? Oh, she might have, now she's off and hopefully she's logging back on.
Okay, we'll give her a minute.
She'll probably go in the waiting room. I will look. Yeah, these were specific questions, so I bet Carol's the best one to answer them. But I will ask John Cecil if you had anything to add to those questions, or we can move on to another question.
He needs to be unmuted, I see in the chat.
Yeah, there you go. You got me. So thanks for unmuting. I was trying to pull back that question. I mean, I think where Carol is going is the fact that, you know, the USDA is regulating controlled populations, and there's this question. I think this is a major issue in terms of what some folks want to see, right? They want to see a marketplace for venison, and yet there are federal laws that likely stand in the way of that. USDA regulations. I also wonder about, now I realize some will suggest we want to constrain this transaction of wild caught venison within a state's boundaries, but I think you're going to run into considerations of wildlife and transference of wildlife out of state, which runs into federal regulations. So there's just a number of potential barriers, or not potential, but existing barriers to a trade in wild caught, hunted, harvested venison. So, I mean, on that point, you know, I think that's where at least some of what Carol was offering was headed.
So she's not on yet. I sent her a message, John. How about this? If we have questions, can you answer to the best of your ability? And, you know, she was the expert, or there's an alternative. We can move on to proposals and, oh, there she is. All right, I'm letting her in. She's in the waiting room. And I gotta unmute her.
All right, and Eileen, I think we're just going to take questions up until about 5 and then move on to proposals, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We want to get to the proposals. We have a lot of them. I think Carol got lost again. She was here.
There, she
In the
should be
waiting-
coming back in.
There she is. Joining. Okay, Carol, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good grief. Sorry about that, folks.
Well, poor John had to answer for you, Carol, so.
I'm
All
sure
right.
you did a great job.
Some degree.
Okay, so we're going to move. We have about 3 or 4 more questions. We're going to stop at Matt Polsky. So we have, well, 1, 2, 3, about 4 or 5. So Christine Hepburn, you're next with your question.
Thank you. Okay, so I had been struggling with a deer on my roughly 200 acres of forest. No matter what I do, I have deer browse. Of course, it's classic. The hunters say I don't have many deer, and all the ecologists say, well, they walk through, see the browse, see the lack of the understory, and I have too many deer. So anyway, I just want to point that out. And I have recreational hunters, and I am looking for professional colors, but they are hard to find. They're hard to get available up north. My one question I'm dying to know is, where was that slide that showed the deer exclosure? Because I'm doing micro exclosures. Every opening I have, I get big openings from big tree fall downs and Sandy and other storms. And I'm not seeing any regeneration of most things.
That was,
What were the characteristics? Where was that?
That was up in Berkshire Valley, on our Berkshire Valley Wildlife Management Area, and that was done, gosh, that was probably 10 years ago or more. And as far as the hunters on your property not doing the job, do you know what they're taking? Do you manage
I mean,
the hunters?
Yes,
And so-
I did have to fire some who were sneaking bucks. But the ones I have now are only taking does. I mean, I have someone now on the property keeping a pretty good eye on that.
Okay.
And I'm hopeful that this year I have some very energetic hunters. I'm hoping for some better results.
Also,
But,
if you get somebody who's good, who manages the hunt, they will make sure that they have people on site every day, not just here and there, and not putting enough effort in, if you will. That's part of the solution as well. Just remember.
Okay,
back
thank you.
to that Berkshire Valley exclosure, though. I've seen many large exclosures, including at Drew University. I've never seen that before, where you couldn't tell the difference.
I have other pictures of that cut too, so.
Okay, Doris Lynn, you're up next. Doris?
Yes, hi. Thank you for the presentation. We know that there are food plots and farm leases on wildlife management areas designed to grow the deer herd, to grow those trophy bucks for hunters. So would the division oppose legislation that would prohibit these practices on state wildlife management areas that are currently intentionally growing the deer herd?
So the purpose for food plots and farmland on wildlife management areas is not to grow the deer. They're doing that by themselves. The purpose is to keep them on wildlife management areas where hunters have access to them so they can harvest them, rather than the deer going out into suburbia where hunters don't have access to them. So yes, we would oppose the legislation because it would have the opposite effect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Larry Harity?
Yes, in addition to my representing New Jersey Outdoor Alliance, I just want to say I'm a trustee for New Jersey Hunters Helping the Hungry. And to answer the question relative to the inspections, if wild deer were to be commercially sold, each individual deer would have to be inspected by a USDA inspector, much like you find in the slaughterhouse, where every day there would have to be a person on site, which would significantly drive up the cost in addition to the butchering costs and the labor to harvest those animals. We have 8 butchers currently in the program. None of those butchers would qualify to be able to sell deer commercially. So there's added cost to any kind of program like that. Thank you.
Okay, that was more of a comment. Carol, did you want a response to that, Larry?
No, just thank you for that information. I didn't have that.
Okay, Elliot Ruga?
Yes, hi, Carol. In your opinion, can we hunt our way to parity with deer in New Jersey?
It's my hope. It's going to require a lot of education, and that's why we need to get more land open. I think a lot of hunters, not all of them, but a lot of hunters have jumped the gap into knowing that they are managers, and it's not about recreation. It's about managing New Jersey's land and the wildlife that inhabits it. So we're moving in a right direction. Again, the challenge is the human population in New Jersey and the lack of access. So
Maybe not.
My magic 8 ball is out of batteries. I don't know. I know that we're not the only state with these issues. We may be the most densely populated state, but other states also have areas of dense population like we do around their major cities, and they are seeing the same circumstances that we're seeing in New Jersey. And no other state has stepped up to commercialize venison. If it is a good solution, why hasn't anybody done it? So we're all trying to figure this out as we go, basically.
Thank you. Matt Polsky?
Yeah, hi. As a sustainability professor, I teach my students to try to understand all points of view and then attempt to reconcile them. Sometimes they can, sometimes they have to side with one side or the other. I almost feel like this is yesterday's issue, but I see this presentation as very one-sided. And while I might come to agree with it, only as a last resort, and I'm not quite sure we're at the last resort point. The discussion about the contraceptives and so forth, are you guys, do you have wildlife, animal welfare people advising you? Are you taking them seriously? Are we adequately funding vaccines? Is there anything promising coming down the pike? I mean, I did a quick search earlier, something Zonesta D that was approved by EPA a few years ago. Are we following these things? Because I hope we're giving this point of view a fair shot, because if we're not, I don't think that's appropriate, because I think we're forgetting that, you know, this might be again yesterday's issue with Bambi syndrome and so forth, but some of us still have that. We're losing that. These are gorgeous animals, and you know, there's a lot more we can say on that philosophy, but I think it's unfortunate simply to discount that previous philosophy, because I think it taught a lot of us to become environmentalists. So it's a little weird for me that here we are, we say we love wildlife and the environment, and we're advocating destroying a key species or downsizing them. And if we have to do it again, we have to do it, but it's a real loss. And if there's any way we can avoid it and still save our forests, I think we should have open minds about it. Thank you.
So Zonesta is PZP, porcine zona pellucida. It's the horse application that they've modified for deer. There was some labeling issues that they were working on. I'm not sure whether they resolved that, but all the challenges that I mentioned are still present. As far as deer being on the landscape, yes, they will always be part of New Jersey's landscape and always should be part of New Jersey's landscape. However, there are more deer in North America today than ever before in recorded history. We have created the imbalance. It is our responsibility to try to bring some balance back for the sake of our forests, for the sake of the people who drive on our roadways, for people who garden, for people who are suffering from tick-borne disease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So doing...
Carol, I'm going to move on to, because we have two more questions, and we just want questions and answers, because we have proposals, and the proposals are presenting some new ideas for all of us to consider. We are going to be getting to that. So Jim, I skipped over you. I didn't see you. So why don't you go ahead, Jim?
No problem, Eileen. Thank you. And Carol, thank you for a very comprehensive and complete presentation. That was excellent. So I want to ask a question about the relationship between forest management and deer populations. I mean, we know where harvesting occurs, deer can have a big impact on regeneration because of their proclivity to eat regeneration. But where we have mature forests, older forests in areas of the state, are deer populations more stable? Are they impacted at all by forest management practices beyond regeneration practices? I'm just curious, because one of the issues we're talking about here in the task force is what our forested landscape should look like. And I'm wondering the extent to which deer populations have an impact, if any at all, on those large expanses of mature forest?
Well, I don't know if I threw this slide up. I don't think I did. I think I had it at the end, but again, I did a literature search back when somebody presented a white paper on forest management years ago, and it says that it's two-pronged. You really can't expect the regeneration that you'd like if you only take one prong out, and that's deer. Canopy cover is the other prong. People don't like to cut trees in New Jersey either. And that is an equal part of the equation. We have seen properties that they managed for deer. They did forest management. You cut it, you leave the slash on the ground, which enables regeneration to grow up through all those dead branches, and it worked really well. I believe you can have a healthy forest with deer in them, but you have to manage your forest as well. I think a large part of the non-regeneration is due to the lack of forest management in this state. I've heard so many presentations where they compare today's forest to the forest of 30 or 40 years ago. Forests aren't static, they change as well. They go through different successional sears, and that accounts for a lot as well. It's not just deer. Forests are such dynamic systems. Deer is only one small part of it. It's an important part, but it's just one part.
Okay, thank you. We are taking one more question. I see that Chief Vincent Mann, you have your hand up. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you. Carol, again, thank you for being here with us tonight and taking time out of your life to be here in your presentation. Just one quick question now, because I'll be coming on with a lot more after this question, I guess. Has there been studies done in regards to the humans and the chemicals being used to sterilize, the wildlife? The deer?
Not to my knowledge, and certainly not in New Jersey, because we don't have a lot of that happening here. But as I said before, when you inject a deer with a chemical like that, you have to put a do not consume tag on it, which will state the date of injection, and for whatever chemical you're using, enough time, an end date that it may be consumed. So after that chemical is metabolized out of the system, I don't think we're sterilizing or using chemical sterilization or contraception enough for that to be an issue right now. Even nationwide, it's been having done in small pockets, but I can't imagine it would be a good thing if it was consumed.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Carol, for your presentation and for taking the questions. Excellent questions. And I think we're going to be exploring some of those threads with the proposals, which we're going to move into right now. We have several proposals. I'm really eager to hear from the proposal sponsors. I hope you guys are ready. First up is Constance Katzenbach. Constance, I want to make sure that you are, oops, I can't find you. Let me find so that you can, there you are. Can you unmute yourself? And no longer than 3 minutes. I think each of you has one proposal except for Angie. I think you have several that you're representing. So about 3 minutes if you have one proposal, and a little bit more if you have multiples. So Constance, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you to the task force, and thank you, Ms. Stanko, for your presentation from the DEP. Notwithstanding your reservations concerning commercial deer hunting, our deer management proposal does center on that. Where we come from is the private sector. We have a small forest farm in which we produce maple syrup. We've been here since 1955 and have produced small batch maple syrup since the 1980s. And we've watched our forests deteriorate, and we believe that deer are the driver keystone species behind that. The deer browse has set up a situation in which native tree species, there is almost no recruitment of native sugar maples or other native tree species in our sugar bush, which is an area which has never had agriculture. We live in an area called the Sourlands in west central New Jersey. Mike Van Cleef talked yesterday about recent surveys showing that the deer population is somewhere around 100 per square mile, which is 10 times what really the area can sustain. And notwithstanding the DEP's reservations about commercial deer hunting, we're asking that our task force consider a proposal to change the current Department of Fish and Wildlife regulations to create a pilot program with a new category of deer license, a commercial deer harvest license, enabling the sale of venison. Infrastructure for the regulated commercial harvest of wildlife, and I'm referring to fur bearers, there are trapping seasons for beaver, otter, all kinds of species, already exists and is administered by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. That the current level of deer population is absolutely deleterious to forest health is well documented. We don't have to go into that. But it's also evident that the population control measures undertaken by the DEP are woefully inadequate to meet the challenge in the face of declining hunter enrollment. According to the DFW's own reports, the total deer harvest in 2021 was less than half the total it was in 2000. A CDAHL pilot program could be monitored very closely, relying on research-based data, targeted public areas of public forests. And if effective, it could be a cost-effective and green tool to return deer population to sustainable levels. We're not talking about extirpating or destroying deer. We're just talking about returning the population levels to a level that's consistent with forest health. The citations that I included with my proposal by K.C. Van Cauderen et al. And outline the proposal most succinctly. And notwithstanding Ms. Stanko's reservations regarding the North American model of wildlife conservation, I do not think that such a proposal is contrary to those. It meets every pillar of the NAMWC in that I can outline all seven pillars of that policy. And commercial deer hunting, because it would be regulated and based on scientific research where such a program could be monitored before, during, and after, is consistent with the policies of the model of wildlife conservation. My other citations include the population surveys by the New Jersey Farm Bureau and as well as Jay Kelly's very excellent research on the effect of increasing deer population on forest ecology. Anyway, that's my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Right on time, Constance. Thank you so much. That was very concise and clear. I forgot to go through the order just so that people know when they're coming. Next will be Rich Isaac from Sierra Club, then Angie Metler and Susan Russell, Daniel Bernier, Emil DeVito, and Stephen Mitchell can't join us today, but his proposal was sent around to everyone for your consideration. So Richard, you are up now. You should be
okay. Well, thank you. My proposal is perhaps a little bit different than some. It's not looking at grown deer, but at fawns. And I noted that a study by the U.S. Forest Service concluded that coyotes help manage deer population in the Southeast. And there is a study there that I can get you if you'd need to. But basically, my proposal is to have a study of deer in deep forests, causes of their deaths within them, to determine if deep forest ecological health can be significantly increased by augmenting the culling of fawns by increasing the number of natural predators, such as eastern coyotes, which we now have, bobcats and bears, or perhaps increased hunting of adult deer, which we've already covered. But basically to go back a little bit more towards where we were years and years ago, where you had natural predators as part of the process. And that's it. I could go on, but I think I'll try to keep it short.
Oh. Well, thanks. All right. Up next is Angie and Doris. Angie, you said you had a PowerPoint and you should be allowed to share your screen. Is it Angie who has the PowerPoint or Doris?
Yes, I have the PowerPoint and I don't have to bring it up right this second. Is that okay?
That's fine, whenever you need to.
Okay, Doris needs to be unmuted too.
She's unmuted, yeah.
I'm
Okay.
unmuted. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Angie Metler. I'm the Executive Director of the Animal Protection League of New Jersey since 1983. Since that time, we've noticed an exponential increase for support for deer as well as non-lethal programs. So I am part of our wildlife mitigation team because we recognize that there are conflicts, especially with deer. And because we love animals and our environment and our forest, we want to find solutions to that benefit everyone. And we've been quite successful in that because we work to eliminate the conflicts by getting at the root of the problems, the causes of the problems. But I got to tell you that since the 1980s, when I was involved, we've heard nothing but complaints about increasing deer populations frequency, especially from farmers, people who live near wildlife management areas, and at all our residential parks. The issue is not having access to deer. Hunting has expanded drastically since the 1980s in parks and backyards, with bow hunters having reduced safety buffers, and from 450 feet to 150 feet. There are longer seasons. Also, does increase their range by 30% when they are hunted. They're smart. They leave when they're hunted. Expecting that more hunting will solve problems that it hasn't solved in 100 years is the definition, by my expertise, of insanity. The very, very first step in reducing deer conflicts and their population is to stop the practices that breed deer. And I'll let Doris take it from here, and then I'll come back.
Hi, I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, it says screen sharing is disabled.
There you go. I didn't know you had also a screen share. You should be able to now, Doris.
Thank you. Okay. So this is just one example of how our state lands are being managed to increase the deer population. This is part of a farm lease. So the state will lease lands to farmers, and you can see here, they're required to make an in-kind contribution by planting deer preferred crops, and they are not allowed to harvest that crop. That crop has to remain standing for the deer. Another way that they increase the deer population is through food plots. This is a website from the South Jersey chapter of the Quality Deer Management Association. They're a private hunting club. They've partnered with the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife to plant food plots for deer. They help pay for the seed. And this is a map showing the deer hunting zones in New Jersey. And you can see the areas in yellow are managed for stabilization of the deer population. The areas in red are being managed for increase of the deer population. This is from the Division of Fish and Wildlife. And of course, you know, the deer population is being increased for hunters, for recreation. Let's see, I can't. I can't access my other, let me see. Okay. And this is the website of a company that makes seed for food plots. you can see the purpose of a food plot is not just to keep the deer on state lands. It's to feed them, it's to grow the population, it's to grow those trophy bucks. You can see here, the number one reason Antler King thinks you should buy their deer food plot seed is protein levels that are crucial to bucks growing bigger antlers. Antler King food plots give you the highest protein levels when compared to other popular food plot brands. So we would ask that, before any lethal methods are considered, that these practices that increase the deer population on state wildlife management areas are ended. And then I want to talk a little bit about baiting. Baiting and feeding increase the deer population. They create unnatural concentrations of wildlife, which spreads disease, and it also causes animals to cross roads when they wouldn't normally cross roads. So these are practices that, oftentimes when a town bans deer feeding, they still have an exception for hunters. So this encourages the animals to cross roads when they wouldn't normally cross roads, and it spreads the disease. So we would ask that any town that wants to ban deer feeding do not have an exception for hunters. Okay, and I'm going to pass it back to Angie.
Thank you, Doris. I'm going to share my screen now. Let me see how I do that.
Okay, we see it.
Okay, and let me just do this. Okay. In 2018, oh, by the way, I'd like to add that New York and Pennsylvania do not allow baiting. In 2018, Dr. Dina Cola, who is from White Buffalo, he's a leading expert in population control of white-tailed deer, remarked that he had been prevented from conducting fertility control in New Jersey for now it's, I guess, 14 years. In the meantime, surgical sterilization, and we do not at this point in time recommend chemical fertility control because Dr. Dina Cola has basically told us that this surgical sterilization is by far the best. So in California, Maryland, Michigan, Ohio, Virginia, and New York, he studied. In the first year, he saw this number of sterilized deer were 100% in California, 100% in Maryland, 96% in New York. Ohio had 86. Only Virginia had the fewest percent sterilized. So you can get at the deer. And here it shows the decline using this particular method over 5 years. New Jersey's community-based deer management law does allow townships to apply for a permit for deer management, other than traditional hunting, as Carol Stanko said, but the listed non-lethal methods, which do include surgical sterilization, has yet to be approved under the rubric that it is still experimental. Well, there's research here that I'm showing you, and Tony DiNicola from White Buffalo has published a report, which I did upload with this presentation. So in Dr. DiNicola's November 17th webinar on fertility control, he presented this data. He also finalized it by saying that the average population decline after 1 year is 27%. So yes, it's got a ways to go, but after 3 to 5 years, it goes up to 49%. So here we are seeing a reduction in the fertility of deer that we have not seen by hunting methods. And Tony, this is very recent research, minimal immigration, and to people like me, I do want the mortality rate to be low. And this is compatible with not only suburbia, but also open populations. So fertility control does need to be made available in New Jersey. Here's somebody out in California. He said his fertility control was so successful that now they want deer to migrate in again. So, and here in New Jersey, Dr. Oswald Smith came out to South Mountain Reservation with us, and we asked him, can you please help us? Dr. Schmidt is a forestry expert from Yale. And we asked him, can you please give us some idea what's going on here? And he did not believe that what is going on in South Mountain Reservation was largely due to deer. We saw jumping worms, and I know everyone's on board. I think that is another thing that we should all get on board with, trying to eliminate invasive jumping worms, because I think the problem is a lot larger than we know. So the key to fewer deer is intact forest and lower fertility. Hunting does not reduce fertility rate. It does not reduce the fertility rate in individuals. It either stabilizes higher breeding rates or, is recorded in New Jersey, increases fertility by improving the habitat. Lethal removal will always require more killing. Mowing the lawn. I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired of mowing the lawn. We need real solutions. Controlled hunts spanning decades, 100 years in New Jersey, with little or no change in forest regeneration or car collisions, self-evidently sustain annual hunting methods. And it's time to try something new. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Angie, and thank you, Doris, for your presentations. Okay, next up, we have Daniel Bernier. You should be able to unmute Daniel.
Okay, I'd like to start by thanking Carol for her presentation. I found it very enlightening and somewhat encouraging. And as we near, it looks like the end of our work here, I'd like to thank all the members of the task force that have been participating. I've learned a lot from all of you, and especially thanking the 4 co-chairs. You have not had an easy job, but you've done a great job of keeping us focused and on task, especially considering the contentious nature of some of the things we're talking about. Before getting into the proposal, I just want to make a quick comment that ties in with Emil's mention yesterday of environmental justice. I represent the Union County Park System and have connections to the Essex County Park System. As you know, you certainly know, Union and Essex counties are 2 of the smallest but most densely populated counties in the state. There's been a lot of discussion on these Zooms about the large forested expanses of the Pine Barrens, or the Northern Highlands, or the WMAs. Our 2,000-acre Watchung Reservation, or the 2,000-acre South Mountain Reservation, don't come close in size or diversity of those properties. These forested parks and dozens of other smaller wooded lots in our parks have lots of edge, and therefore are heavily impacted by deer browse and invasive plant proliferation. So I would just ask that, please, let's not let the discussion of the large state tracts overshadow county and municipal properties. They are very important for those of us in the urban and suburban counties. And for many of our residents, these might be the only forested areas that they will ever experience. Now, getting into the proposal, just quickly by way of background, I have planned and administered community-based deer management programs in Union and Essex counties since 1995. My proposal was developed with input from 10 representatives of member agencies of the New Jersey Recreation and Parks Association. We've heard repeatedly that forest health is greatly impaired by our proliferation of white-tailed deer. Culling by licensed sportsmen has not been able to keep pace with deer numbers, especially as the number of licensed hunters and their access to huntable land has been on the decline. Since 1994, land managers in New Jersey have had the ability to utilize alternative deer control measures through the community-based deer management program. As a condition of that program, as we've heard, the permittee is required to provide for the donation of venison to a community food bank. Generally, the permittee pays to a butcher the customary cost of processing the deer harvested by that program. That cost can be a considerable piece of the budget of an agency's deer management program. In 2019, the butchering cost for the Essex County Deer Management Program amounted to $15,000 for 200 deer. Individual hunters can participate in the Hunters Helping the Hungry program, in which they take a harvested deer to a participating butcher. The venison is given to a food bank, and the butcher is reimbursed by the Hunters Helping the Hungry program. However, the funding source for that program is unstable and mostly reliant on donations.
Well, I think she's supposed to, but I don't know.
After the funding is depleted, A hunter must pay the cost of butchering themselves, even though they are donating the venison. As Carol pointed out, after having filled his or her freezer with venison from deer harvested early in the season, an avid hunter might continue to hunt the rest of the season if they knew they had an outlet for the carcass, but not if they have to pay $90 for each surplus deer. This results in less deer being culled statewide than might otherwise be. A stable source of funding for the Hunters Helping the Hungry program needs to be established to encourage greater hunter participation throughout the hunting seasons. Funding assistance to eligible community-based program applicants might encourage more public agencies to start or maintain a hunting program. And the other companion problem is that all processing of venison for charitable purposes must be conducted by butchers that are certified by the New Jersey Department of Health, but hunter access to them is limited. As we've already heard, currently only 8 butchers statewide are certified, and 4 of them are clustered in Hunterdon County. So it's difficult for most hunters in New Jersey to get their deer to a participating butcher. The New Jersey Department of Health and/or the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife needs to encourage other New Jersey butchers who process deer to seek certification and participate in the Hunters Helping the Hungry program. A stable source of funding might provide a means for incentivizing those butchers. Larry Harity mentioned the problems for butchers in having to separate their processing. That is truly a problem, but there are butchers out there who are processing deer all over the state. Somehow they need to be brought into the Hunters Helping the Hungry program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up is Emil DeVito.
Hi, everybody. My proposal deals with having the legislature, request that the Division of Fish and Wildlife basically try new things. So the pilot program in the Sourlands was a great suggestion. There's very little state land in the Sourlands, but there's lots of county land and nonprofit land with large enough acreage that a pilot program on some sort of commercial hunt or establishing a fund to make sure that every deer can be paid for in terms of being butchered. I don't know if we ever get, sufficient funding for something like that. I don't know that there's enough. I mean, we would need to know if food banks could handle all the deer that need to be culled. The deer need to be reduced by 90%. For every 10 females out there, there should be 1. Jay Kelly's research is irrefutable. And the concept that public land is in good health where hunters have access is completely unsupported. There is almost no advanced regeneration of trees, seedlings, and saplings in any of our public forests. This is statewide in places where there's perfectly good access. Atlantic white cedar swamps in the Pine Barrens don't regenerate in many cases because of deer. Forest gaps in northern New Jersey are the key. It's very easy to put up a fence in the middle of a giant clear cut and see that the forest grows back in a giant clear cut, and there's no difference with full sunlight between a fenced area, a small fenced area, and the surrounding regeneration. But forest gaps do not have advanced regeneration of trees, and forest gaps regenerate almost no place in New Jersey does a forest gap regenerate with native trees that are already there, present, waiting for the sun to hit them. Advanced regeneration is the key. It's not been studied in any of our forests by the DEP, and it's only been studied by Jay Kelly. So we need to focus on getting back advanced regeneration so that the next generation of forest trees is already present, resisting browsing by deer, and that's the ecological concept that's been missing from this entire discussion today. That's pretty much it. My proposal is that the legislature must focus on key topics such as pilot programs so that we can harvest deer and not have the burden be, as a previous speaker said, beyond the hunter to pay for all that butchering. And we should, and the other thing is that the reason that there is no commercial deer hunting anywhere is because fish and wildlife agencies across this nation are opposed to it. New Jersey needs to be first. Thank you.
Did we lose Eileen again?
Oh, yeah, you lost me for a minute, but I'm back.
Oh,
Okay, thanks. We have one more. Can you hear me, Tom? I can
Yes.
see. Okay, yeah, we have one more speaker. Then I am going to turn it over to Tom. Chief Vincent Mann actually submitted a verbal proposal that he'd like to share, and we invited him to give his thoughts on some of the proposals that he has heard thus far. So Chief Mann, you are on.
Again, thank you. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm the Turtle Clan Chief of the Ramapo Lenape Nation. I am an advocate for all Indigenous people of the state of New Jersey and those who come from other states that call this place home. One of the things that I am listening to is how, our natural environment is out of balance. And I would take it a step further to say that our world is out of balance. And in order to put that world back into balance, it's imperative that the non-Indigenous population of the United States actually, listens intently to the Indigenous people. I listened to all of the proposals. It is, unfortunately, I think that it is, there needs to be a way to curb the deer population, and Indigenous people here in the state of New Jersey have us, right? We're a part of the natural environment. So when we're talking about the environment, you're talking about tens of thousands of Indigenous people who call this place home, who seemingly are left out of the processes and seemingly left out of the thought. And when we take and think about, for example, one of the things is commercial hunting. Well, there's enough organizations here and representatives here to actually fund a commercial butcher, place for the 3 Indigenous tribes, or specifically the Turtle Clan of the Ramapo, who live in a federal Superfund site for 58 years. Harvesting deer that are filled with toxins and poisons, which is furthering their health issues that they have. So when I hear of, I hear of places spending $90,000 for hiring people to come in and to do deer cullings. Like I heard earlier today, one of the first people to ask questions, they have a 200-acre farm. They've had no success with, having people come in. There needs to be an avenue for the people who are at the bottom of the scale, who have the ability to come together and to do controlled hunts, where we'll be able to go in and set up hunting camps for 2 weeks at a time, and to take that deer and to harvest it, to butcher it, and to distribute it into their communities. It's also another way for the collective on here, 80-something human beings, to also help us to establish a cottage industry that could be a benefit to New Jersey as a whole, right? It'd be a benefit to our local communities who have always had the less paying jobs, always looked down upon. And in reality, we've been sitting here this whole time waiting for an opportunity for a door to open so that we can have a voice. And this is our opportunity to have that voice. We've been here for 12,000 plus years in the very footprint that we're in now. And it's time that all of the other organizations in the state of New Jersey take their responsibility to those who came before them, which were not necessarily, I don't mean your ancestors, but my ancestors. And, who knows the woods better than those who still, forage and hunt and gather wild medicinals, wild edibles, and the game that is out there. Our people need to be provided access to those things first and foremost, because venison is a significant part of our diet, right? We weren't designed by Chisholm Moquin, the creator, to eat cows, right, or chickens. We need these things in order for us to put ourselves back into balance, right? So that we can begin to heal ourselves from the inside out, both physically and spiritually. And so having 3 state recognized tribes with a a total population of probably nearing 30,000 people, I would tend to think that, you know, having the availability to do controlled hunts, you know, where we can set up hunting camps on preserves, on state land, as the state recognized people of the state of New Jersey, should be at the forefront of any proposal. It's not that we're against utilizing other techniques to try to help curtail the explosion population that we have, but when you have a sector of human beings who rely on that resource, you know, why would we not go to them to collectively work together, you know, to put this part of the world back into balance, which can include an enormous amount of things, from the sugar bushes to anything. So that's my proposal. Sorry that I don't have something written out or in other words, you know, to show you all. It really is what we need to do. You know, we stood out in Sparta Mountain, and Emil was there, and we had this conversation, and as well as others that were there. And the only thing preventing that from happening, right, is us human beings. You know, the reason why the USDA doesn't allow that to happen is because of politics, right? And let's take it beyond politics and make it a human issue, right? We love to look at deer too. I don't have a second of time for myself to even go fishing, never mind hunting, right? But it's hunting, and venison or other wild game is important to my survival as an Indigenous person here in the state of New Jersey. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Mann. I'm going to turn it over now to Tom Gilbert.
Thank you, Chief Mann. Thank you to all of our proposal presenters and DEP. I think what we wanted to do at this point was to remind everyone of our current language in the framework. If our great intern, Allison, is able to pull that up for us for a moment. Looks like it's on the way. There we go. Okay, so it's the second part there with some of the blue text. Here's what we have at the moment, that the DEP should be directed to identify and implement new and innovative steps to measure and reduce deer densities as necessary in our public forest lands to ecologically sustainable levels to enable our forests to regenerate. So that's where we are now. I just wanted to remind everyone of the language that we have in the framework. And you know, the purpose of the conversation today is to, again, hear from the DEP, hear from our task force members about ideas there that we might consider to potentially incorporate into this language. I do think that although that language doesn't specifically mention the thrust of it, it doesn't specifically mention the proposal ideas that we heard today. The thrust of it clearly does talk about the need for identifying and implementing new and innovative steps. And I think what we've been hearing about today are various ideas for new and innovative steps. So anyway, with that as background, maybe you could drop that off the screen, Allison. And we want to take a little bit of time to see if people have questions for the proposal presenters. So I guess we have Elliot first. There you go. Trying to unmute
There we
you.
go. Thanks. Thanks, Tom. I have a question for Chief Mann. Chief, that's very cordial of you to ask if you can increase your opportunity to hunt on properties and lands in New Jersey, but isn't it true that the Treaty of Easton and all of the land deeds that were used to take your land away, 200 plus years ago, your ancestors reserved the right to fish, to hunt, to gather, and to strip bark from trees? I would argue you have that right now. And land throughout New Jersey is available for you to. Chief, with us?
It's the chief. I'm sorry, chief. There you go.
There we go. Thank you. It is true, Elliot. The state of New Jersey officially by law recognizes the 3 state recognized tribes. The Ramapo Lenape Nation is one of those 3 tribes. By doing so, they acknowledge that we're the Muncie speaking people. By doing so, that goes to the Treaty of Easton of 1758 before the founding of this country. And in fact, we reserve the right to hunt, fish, gather, and strip bark from trees. That is correct. One of the things that I am trying to put forward is that it shouldn't take me to stand up and say the state of New Jersey authorized dumping in my community, right? To have that be something that the state or other organizations come to us to say, you know, listen, we have this property. Can we work together to try to mitigate the deer issue, right? Or any other environmental issue that's at hand. And I heard earlier, I heard earlier that somebody mentioned environmental justice. And this is an environmental justice issue for us as well, right? Because of the prohibition of our people to culturally express ourselves, right, through our state recognition as well as the Treaty of Easton of 1758. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, chief. Thank you, Elliot. We're going to go to Matt Polsky.
Yeah, this is a quick comment on the revised language on the deer management. I'm a big fan of compromised language, and I think you hit it very, very well. Conceivably, it's something that we could live with, so that's good as far as it goes. But as someone who spent many decades and is still trying to help DEP do innovative things, both from the inside and from the outside, well, it's not impossible. It's tricky and it requires an open mind. And I don't sense that DEP is there yet on this one. I wish I could say differently. It is possible, but I think they need to listen more seriously to what Angie and others are telling them. And then if they reject it and go the hunting route, I could live with it.
Okay, thank you, Matt. That sounds like more of a statement than a question, but that's okay. We're going to move on to Julia. We're looking mostly for questions for the proposal sponsors.
So I have a question for the chief and I have a question for Angie Mettler. Chief, are you asking this effort, the framework that is being put together, to specifically request that the state work with the tribe to make it possible for you to hunt in some of our public lands in a way that is appropriate for you?
So yes, that language needs to be specifically put in there. And the other language that needs to go with that is Executive Order 122, which commands every state agency and department and employee to have these conversations with us. And that is underneath Governor Corzine. Specifically, what's important about that as well is that everyone needs to read the 2007 report.
Thank you, Chief. And of Angie Mettler, in preparing for today's meeting, Angie, I did read the ovurectomy paper, that the research article. It was the only research article that you attached by Dr. Dina Kola. I was struck by the fact that it says that the paper is based on research that he did from 2012 to 2020, when he sterilized 493 deer. Now, we heard from Carol Stanko that she estimates at a minimum the population of the deer herd in the state is over 150,000. So my question is, this study concludes by saying, finally, it is important to note that fertility control treatments may be a necessary co-management technique with existing hunting or culling programs, where local populations cannot be reduced to objective levels. And I'd love you to comment on that, because it seems to say that you can't possibly rely just on fertilization to control the deer herd. Is that a fair statement?
And that is in the research report, as you stated. But Tony has told us on many different occasions and at many of the lectures that we've went to, that surgical sterilization will eventually go past the need for doing it together. We're at the beginning because we can't get a handle on it. In Maryland, it is actually a method that they use in a county. They don't need to even apply for a permit anymore. In California, in Maryland, in Michigan, New Jersey needs to be on the forefront. We can't, Dr. DiNicola also told us about a fertility control project in Princeton that was very good, and it was stopped. It was stopped because of a fictional 2,000-foot rule, because if you use darts, it's 2,000 feet. If you use guns, it's 450 feet. If you use a bow, it's 150 feet. So we need to change some things, but I sympathize with you, Julia, because I feel very, very strongly that we do need to reduce the deer population. I just disagree on the methodology because it hasn't worked and we have to try something new. And I'd like to also add, Chief Mann, my organization, not that it matters to you or not, but I really do need to say that we have no objection to subsistence hunting on any lands where our Native Americans live. And we appreciate your contribution to our environment.
Okay, thank you. I have a note that we have someone who's unable to raise a hand who would like to ask a question. Jean Publi, I'm not sure how to say Jean's last name. Publier?
Yeah, so Jean, we asked you to unmute. You should be good. Okay, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I put in a proposal and you just ignored me. And then I also heard the name Sue Russell, who was going to speak on a proposal, and I have not heard her speak. But yes, I do represent a different point of view on what is happening to blame deer for what is going on in our forests. I think that they are a scapegoat. I think that we have an agency which in fact is made up, which is ruled by a council that is made up of only farmers and hunters, and that if you are an animal protector, you are blackballed from that agency. You don't ever get a seat on that commission that makes the rules on hunting and killing animals in New Jersey. Why do we have a lack of representation for all 9 million of us? Why do we have the Fish and Game Council, who is made up only of farmers and hunters, both of which are a small minority of New Jersey citizens, being the only ones who make decisions on killing animals in New Jersey? I find that that's a lack of representation. It is unconstitutional. It should not be happening, and it's been going on for 25 years that I know of. Okay, so this agency that we have makes money.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you. Do you have a question? I understand your point.
No, I have a proposal. You are not allowing my proposal. I had a proposal.
Jean, please take a breath. Jean, pause. Okay. Not all of the proposals that were submitted were accepted. So there were some proposals there were some missing information in the proposals. So not every proposal that was submitted was accepted. So that's part of the answer. And we did make an effort to have a diversity of viewpoints represented amongst the presenters today. So, okay, folks, we're running up against it. We're going to take a few more questions up until about 6, because then we're going to have to try to move forward. So let's go to Paul.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
this might not be a relevant question, but I'm just putting it out to anybody who has some information on it, maybe the original presenter. I've lived in the same place in New Jersey, same house for 63 years. And for my whole childhood up until about, I don't know, 35, I never saw a deer, and I live in a forested area. And, you know, I've watched the population increase until now. I can go out any time, any night, and see deers all over the place. I have a question. My question is, what is the root cause of this explosion in deer population? That's my question to anyone who has information.
Do any of the presenters want to field that?
Sure. I think I covered it in, at least in part during my presentation. We created habitat for them when we first came here because we cut forests. Deer are an edge species, as a few people have mentioned. We eliminated top predators. We feed them intentionally and unintentionally, and we protect them from harvest by closing properties to hunting. We have very high reproductive rates in the state, so we have exponential population growth, and we cannot get ahead of the curve now because of so much property being closed to management.
I think Doris had wanted to respond as well, Tom.
Yes,
Sure.
I would also like to add that a lot of habitat has been taken away from them. So they are seeking new habitat. Also, suburban landscaping attracts them to suburban neighborhoods. And I don't know where you live, Paul, but where I live in Freehold, I live about a mile away from a county park that just recently, in the grand scheme of things, started allowing deer hunting. And I never saw a deer in my yard until the local county parks started allowing deer hunting. And now the hunters are driving them out of the parks.
Okay. Thank you. Let's take a few more here. Let's go to Lewis. Trying to unmute you here, Lewis. Zoom is being uncooperative. Can any other co-chair unmute Lewis? There we go. Thank you.
Sure. Oh, there he goes.
There you go. Yes. I just wonder if there would be an interest in just the language of what you put up last, Tom, and where it says that reduce deer numbers, comma, as necessary, comma, to replace that with maybe something that just says manage the deer population too. This way you don't have to go just only focus on reduce. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, but I think manage the population to reach that sustainable level that will allow our forest to recover. None of that
Manage
changed.
versus reduce. Okay, got it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
That's all.
Okay, let's go to Doug.
Hi. Yeah, I had a question for any of the presenters. I was looking, you know, I've heard about this, and then Elaine talked about it, and I've seen just going through areas where crops are planted apparently for the deer to eat. You know, it seems like we have one hand, we're concerned about the size of deer, but yet we're feeding them. The other states where they have a little bit less of a problem and they don't allow feeding, I know they talk about they have better hunting culture, but does anybody know, are any of these crops for feeding planted in New York or Pennsylvania? And I fully support Chief Mann's proposal, but I'm not gonna, I love the idea and also increasing the hunters for the hungry. I think we need to, I have a friend that's a USDA, recently retired, she's a vet, so I know there's a lot of issues with getting certifications for folks to sell anything, even like organic agriculture has problems with shipping in slaughter. So I just was wondering about the feeding, because it sounds like we're creating this edge habitat by fragmenting the forests, and we're also planting things for them to eat and feeding them. Do we know with states that don't allow that, has that variable been studied separately with the deer population? That's my question.
Do any of the presenters have information on that?
I'm going to
Sure.
answer
So-
that question. I'm going to answer that question. Carol
Okay.
pointed out a number of reasons for the explosion of the deer population. And Doug, you just mentioned about fragmentation and suburbanization. There's another factor, and that is that along with that suburbanization and fragmentation of even the fairly remote parts of New Jersey, what we have done is explode the amount of cool season plants that are on the landscape, plants that green up in early March, as soon as we start to get a warm day. Almost no native species green up until late April, and most of them in early May. There's not supposed to be food on the landscape greening up when the deer are trying to bring twins and triplets to term, okay? And actually, have them become fawns. A natural population of deer in a natural wild area in the wintertime is supposed to be running out of food. And that's why in the old days, deer would rarely have more than one offspring, and the others would, not come to term, spontaneously abort, that type of thing. Because they're ready to have three if there's an abundance of food, or at least twins. And now it happens all the time because of the fact that we have, as humans, have transformed the landscape into plants that green up in late February and early March. And we can't change that anymore. That's not going to change. So all these little tinkering around the edges of don't feed the deer and don't do this and don't do that, it's not going to change the landscape. The landscape is going to support deer having twins and triplets because it's what we've made, and it's not going to change. So we have to come up with much more drastic measures to reduce the population. And then once the population is low, then we don't have to kill so many deer. And Dan Bernier can talk about that, I'm sure. Maybe it's time for him to have a chance to answer. Because in the first couple of years of the Watchung Reservation, there were lots of deer had to be killed. And then within almost no time, the number of deer that had to be taken every year dropped to some very small numbers. And Dan, maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, Emil, we still haven't gotten down to the levels we should be at, but certainly the levels are greatly reduced from what we started at. Watchung Reservation now is probably in the neighborhood of 30, 35 deer per square mile, where it started at 180. And our initial 5-year program brought it down pretty quickly. But there still is not enough hunters and enough hunting days in these kind of programs to bring the numbers down where they need to be. There needs to be more hunting.
But your question was about other states that have prohibited food plots and how New Jersey compares. I'm not aware of any state that prohibits food plots. Just about every state manages the deer for hunters because, the state wildlife management agencies are run by hunters.
Okay, so everyone, it's 6 o'clock. And this is obviously a very rich topic. I know we could continue to talk about this probably for a very long time. So co-chairs, we can continue to take a few more questions. We can try to discuss, how we might be able to move forward in terms of whether, any of the proposals that we've heard today, we could potentially incorporate into the language that we have now. So my feeling is we should probably move to the latter, just in the interest of time. If people have questions that we didn't get to, you could put them into the chat, maybe send them to Allison, and we can try to pass those along to the proposal sponsors, and we also would just love to hear, what the outstanding questions are. I guess I would just throw out there that I think probably the reason that there's quite a bit of agreement on the language that we have now is because it is very broad. It doesn't get into a lot of specifics. It references new and innovative ways without detailing what those new and innovative ways are. And so it's probably one of those things where beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And people can interpret that new and innovative ways in lots of different ways. So I think the question is, could we list some of those new and innovative ways drawing from the proposals that we've heard today. You know, and that would require people being willing to have, you know, some things on the list that maybe are your favorites and some things on the list that are not your favorites, right? So require a little bit of compromise. I mean, one thing we could do, we could certainly make reference to the importance of the state having consultation with and considering the role that the state recognized Native American tribes could play in helping to manage the deer population while also helping to, you know, feed their people. That would certainly be one that hopefully no one would object to. We could also reference some of the other ideas. I think in particular, if what we're suggesting be done is that the DEP to be directed to probably go through a study process and a stakeholder process to explore different options, new and innovative options, including those that we've been discussing today, for reducing the, you know, the deer population to more sustainable levels. And, you know, we could specifically reference some of the options that should be explored. It doesn't mean that there's an ironclad commitment to those things, but in my view, it's never a bad thing to have various options explored and studied and considered, right? And so that could be a broad list. It can include things like, you know, pilot projects for commercial harvesting. It could include things like, you know, studies regarding, you know, opportunities or the potential for increasing native predators in deep forests. It could include things like, you know, non-lethal alternatives. Essentially, it could make reference to, it could include things like enhancing the Hunters for the Hungry, Hunters Helping the Hungry program. So I guess what I'm proposing is that we would list some of these different ideas and options that have been brought forward in the proposals as examples of the types of new and innovative ideas that the DEP should be required to consider and report back to the legislature. So that's one possible way that we can move forward. But let me stop there and see what my fellow co-chairs think at this point.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Tom. Unless we don't all agree on that, but I think, you know, DEP explore, consider, do some research and report back. And yeah, I mean, it's a great idea.
Other co-chairs, Eileen, Andy, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Making suggestions to do more research where research is clearly needed, I think, is always a good thing. And we've heard a couple of good ideas that warrant some attention. And I think by listing them, we're not saying they must be done, but we're saying please consider these other approaches. I think is a good thing to suggest.
Andy, anything?
Yep. No, I would agree. I think, you know, based on all the conversation, just a couple notes I had made. One is, you know, I'm a consulting forester, so I work with 600-700 private landowners, and we talk about deer hunting and the necessity to hunt deer on their property all the time. And it is there's a serious kind of level of, I guess you would say, ignorance as it relates to the effect of the deer herd on the health of the forest. So I do think the educational, maybe we can incorporate something with education into our framework as well, that I think at large, most people do not understand the connection between deer and forest health. So that's just something that as I've listened, I kind of made a note of.
All right, great, Andy, thank you. So if we could have everybody with a hand up, put your hand down for the moment, because I just want to do a quick take the temperature of the group. So I guess what we're saying here is we would do two things. One, we would add some language that would specifically stress the importance of the state working with the state recognized tribes on deer management. And second, we would add some language that would highlight some of the ideas that were brought forth in the proposal as examples of the types of new and innovative strategies that the DEP should be required to study and consider, again, with, I think, stakeholder input. So that's pretty much the proposal in terms of how we would refine the language and the framework, and just want to get a sense if there are people that have, if there are many people that have objections to that as a way that we would move forward. So if people object to what I've just laid out, please put your hand up. It's like 2 people. Okay. 1, Chris? Okay, let's 2. All right, let's hear from Christine. Hold on, I'm unmuting you now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
My objection is, first of all that you said was fine, but I don't see it going anywhere without a target of a sustainable 10, ending up with a sustainable 10, roughly 10 deer per square mile. Carol, all the presentations were great. Angie's, everyone, I love the different perspectives. I will definitely want to talk to Chief Mann about my property. But without an agreement, DEP is not managing for a sustainable level, clearly, according to Angie's presentation. They're managing for too many deer. So all these great ideas, it's great that you'll mention them, but I think we have to push DEP to set a statewide low level of deer, sustainable. That's all.
Right. And in my mind, Chris, that's implied in our language now, because, and again, I don't have it in front of us, but it says that the DEP should be directed to basically identify strategies to reduce the population to sustainable levels that can enable our forests to regenerate. I mean, I think that's a different
But she would not, but Carol would not answer. She's in charge. She's been in charge for decades, and she wouldn't answer the question of a
But she
target
doesn't have a
number.
directive from the legislature to do this. So that's what's different here. Basically, what the language we have is the legislature directing the agency to identify the steps needed to reduce the deer population and to consider new and
Okay, I just think it
I
would
think
be
that's what we're
really
driving
stronger if we had a number. Okay, I'm
Carol,
done.
if you want to, I mean, if you want to
Yeah,
comment,
just
please.
a word, thank you. So in order to get your 10 deer per square mile, which is, I don't know if that's even attainable under the best conditions, what you would virtually have to do is declare eminent domain and open up everyone in the state's property to hunting, and that can never happen. I've stated that that access was the challenge, and it will be a challenge for whatever management action you seek to take. If you don't have landowners that are in on the solution, it dilutes the solution. So the education suggestion was great. Yes, we definitely need more education on a lot of things relating to wildlife, but it's getting properties open to deer management, whatever management turns out to be.
Right. Thanks, Carol. And I mean, our language doesn't say 10 deer per square mile, right? I know that's an issue that's come up, but and to some degree, it leaves what those levels are and whether different levels are appropriate in different places. It leaves that, I think, subject to further sort of discussion as opposed to setting some specific limit. So, Doris?
Yeah, I agree with what you said about Native Americans, although I would have to see the exact language. Regarding number 13, the forest management in deer, it's too vague. If you make any proposal vague enough, people kind of agree in theory, but it leaves too much discretion.
Well, and that's why we suggested adding some specific ideas based upon the proposals today, right? So we would list the different pilot projects for commercial harvesting, non-lethal methods.
Yeah, I would be opposed to commercial harvesting, to selling deer meat.
I understand that, but here's the issue for all of us, Doris. If you want non-lethal methods on the list, you have to be willing to support some other ideas that are not your preferred way of getting there. That's the art of compromise here, right? So are we all willing to, the various people have different ideas about how this should be done. So we may not each be able to get our particular idea as the only one put forward, but what I'm proposing is that the various ideas would all be put forward. So your idea will be on the table. It won't be the only one on the table, but it'll be on the table. And that's what you have to consider.
I'd have to see the exact wording, but I would probably oppose it.
Because there might be some people who would say the same of what you're proposing, right? So, but
true.
their idea is on the list too. So that's sort of the, you know, that's sort of the idea here, is that the various ideas that people have brought forward would all be on the list for further study, for further conversation, right? And then this whole conversation could be continued through a more formal stakeholder process with the agency. So, okay, Charlize?
Yeah, I'm Charlize Katzenbach, and a question was asked earlier on, how come we have so many deer? The DEP created this problem. The DEP, when I was a child, there were very few deer. They limited any doe hunting. They kept it completely in bucks, and they raised very successfully the number of deer. They should be required to manage, that is the statement, they should be required to manage the number of deer by whatever methodology to a certain level which is sustainable in this state. Their job is not to make money through the sale of licenses. Their job is to manage the deer population and the wildlife population of this state at sustainable levels. So they should be required to take it to a certain level. However they decide to do that, and all the proposals, any of the proposals should work. The question is, they have to do that and get it down.
I think many of us agree. That's what we're trying to suggest here. Okay, so we're going to just take a few more minutes. So we'll go Robert, Leslie, and Emil, but please, we just need to hear quickly if you have concerns about what's been proposed. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, thank you. This is Rob Tangent, and just an individual, not representing any organizations. And while I agree with everything that I've heard for the most part. I just think it's not strong enough. I think it needs to be more assertive, similar to what the last guy said. Maybe different. I don't have any bent towards DEP or not. I just say the language should be not just study and educate, but actively do something to bring it down to sustainable levels within an X period of time. Much more aggressive language than just study. It just isn't strong enough for me.
Got it. Thank you. Leslie?
Hi, thank you. I actually want to ask a question of the chairs that you might think is off topic, but it sounds like we're not having more proposals, and I have two concerns. While we had many proposals on young forest, we have not had any on interior forest, including Sharon Wander's excellent proposal that I think is crucial to this discussion. And there are also a number of other proposals that don't seem to be, I guess, accepted because they were related to old forest and carbon and protecting forests. And I think the climate end of this has been really given short shrift. Yesterday, it should have been about climate. The very first one was about funding, not climate. We canceled some others. And I think we really have not finished the climate discussion and really need to lead some time to address these issues. Thank you. I mean, are we just going to say we want to start cutting more in public forests? Because that's what it sounds like.
All right,
Thank
we're going
you.
to go Emil last. Again, if people could stay on topic. The question was, we're trying to figure out if people are objecting to what's been proposed on this specific issue. Emil,
I think it needs to, I think it needs to be a little bit stronger, like some of the other people have said. And I think it might be that people are uncomfortable with a density number, 10 per square mile or whatever it is, because that number is going to vary depending on forest type and the level of the serious destruction that's already occurred. Some forests are closer to being able to heal than others. So that number might be too strict. But what it needs to be is that we shouldn't be counting deer, we should be measuring the vegetation. If we have advanced regeneration so that forest gaps can grow up with native plants, then we know we have the right number of deer. And these problems are not to do with earthworms. These problems started happening before the Asian earthworms got here. All these other reasons for why the forests aren't regenerating are completely spurious. The only problem that's stopping our forests from regenerating in natural forest gaps on good soils is deer. And that's what should be measured. If we have regeneration, advanced regeneration, so that when a gap forms, we get native trees and shrubs and wildflowers in those gaps and birds feeding their young in those gaps, then we know that we have the right number of deer. And so we don't need to do all this expensive counting and analyzing and studies. All we have to do is look at the vegetation. The vegetation tells us what's going on, and that should be somehow reflected in our request to the legislature. Ecologists need to have a say in this instead of all these field and stream wildlife biology claims that are unsubstantiated. Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, it feels to me like there's a lot of agreement here. When we had a small number of people who were raising hands, raising concerns, and in most cases, it's people that want the language to be stronger. So I feel like, fellow co-chairs, we've got enough to work with here. I feel like we're generally, I think we have a direction and we can go back and work through the language and have something that we can bring back to people that feels like there should be a lot of agreement on. So
yeah, I
given
agree,
the
but I
hour,
think Chief Mann had his hand up. I just want, can we call on him real quick?
sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say that it's inherent of us to be an environmentalist, right? And so, I look at areas like High Mountain Preserve, right? And the whole town of Wayne, New Jersey. And I know that, hunting is basically prohibited there, right? Any form of it. And so while we know that we cannot go in there and do hunting in there as a measure to reduce the deer population, especially there, I see where, going in there and sterilizing the deer population there would be a tremendous benefit, right? I think that what you laid out, Tom, is that putting these proposals together, somehow taking them and blending them together, right? As these are all the options that should be employed by the state of New Jersey, depending on, the certain circumstances of the certain areas in which we're talking about. On the other side of that coin, any public land, every private landowner or every public trust has the opportunity on their own to come up with a deer management plan and to approach us and say, would you guys be willing to come here and to do deer cullings on our land, right? Nobody here has to wait for that whatsoever, and that's something that's really important. While we're going through this process, right, to come up with the best synergetic effect for the state of New Jersey in regards to deer population and the vegetation and in our natural environment, we can be actually taking actions, outside of this.
Absolutely.
Thank
I have
you.
a feeling you're going to be hearing from some people, Chief. So I think there'll be opportunities in the meantime. So why don't we do this? We wanted to just each of the co-chairs take an opportunity to share a few kind of parting words about this process and kind of what happens next. So I'm happy to kick that off, or I'm happy to defer to my another co-chair if anybody wants to kick it off. All right, nobody's jumping in, so I'm going to go ahead. I think this has been a amazing process. It's been a hard process. but I think we have made a lot of headway. I think we've advanced the conversation well beyond what it was when this process started. We obviously didn't resolve all the issues. We didn't reach agreement on everything, but I think we found more common ground on more issues maybe than we thought we might. I think this is the beginning, not the end of the conversation. There's so many complex issues here, and we could spend a lot more time on all of them, and these conversations are going to continue. But we do have a deadline. We were asked to come back to the senator, by the end of the year, and in order to do that, we need to move forward based on the conversations we've had thus far. Which is why the framework, I think, is very high level and it's general, and there are a lot of details there that still are going to have to be fleshed out, and there's going to be opportunities for that to happen in the legislative process, and then ultimately, I think, in various, hopefully, if there's legislation that moves forward in various agency rulemaking processes. So I would encourage people to look at the progress that we have made, to keep this conversation going, to consider compromise, and understand that there's lots of different points of view here and perspectives. No one point of view or perspective is going to fully carry the day and get everything you want. That's not the way our system works. It's not the way our society works. And so I hope people will stay a part of this conversation and consider, supporting the framework, even if it's not everything that you would want it to be, because I think it is progress, and I think that progress can continue if we all stay a part of this process and can continue to keep debating and discussing and learning, that we can move this forward. And there's a lot of ideas here that I think can make a big difference for our forest. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, I'll go next. Ditto what Tom said, and a big thank you. This was an awful lot of time, not just for these meetings, which I appreciate. Many of you attended every single one. Thank you for that. I may disagree with some of you, but I certainly respect the fact that you put the time in. Also, the proposals. We didn't get to all the proposals that we wanted to, but we appreciate the time and effort it took to develop them. So thank you all for participating in this very important task force. It's really appreciated.
And Andy, I'm going to jump in.
Go for it.
Well, I just want to say thank you, everybody. I mean, ditto to Tom, ditto to Eileen. I mean, the conversation has been complicated. It has been difficult. I think, the reason why we're here is because we feel all very strongly about our forests. Tom, you said, there's so many different ideas, but in reality, what makes all of our ideas so complicated is because the science on itself is complicated for forests. And it's just coming from all different positions and directions. And I mean, that is the nature of science, right? It's always evolving, and research proves something wrong. And then we just keep going, right? And so I think that's what we wanted to achieve here, is that we could find some common ground to evolve the conversation of our forests in New Jersey. And I think, to what Tom was saying, our framework sort of accomplishes that on a really high level, because we need to start somewhere. And the high level is where we're starting. And at least we're going to get some rules and regulations and some groundwork for our public lands. And so I'm appreciative to all of you, what you were just saying, Eileen. I don't even know how many meetings we've had, like over 20, over 2 hours every single meeting, all that work, putting together proposals. I mean, it's been incredibly humbling to be part of this experience. And everybody has learned so much. I personally learned so much. So I just want to thank you all. And I think we've achieved not everything that we wanted to achieve, obviously, but I think we've achieved like what Tom said, the start of the conversation. And we're definitely going to be participating on the legislature when, bills come forward, and at the, at the agency level, to making the rules stronger, being participant of that process. So the work just started on 2022, and we'll continue to see you all and work on all of this to make sure that, our forests are protected. So thank you. Andy.
Okay, last but not least, I was thinking maybe some participants would fall off, but it's still at 74. Wow, they want to hear what I have to say here. No, I think just the word I think of is grateful. So I think it's been said by every co-chair, and I hope everybody feels our gratefulness for your participation. So obviously, we have felt the burden of spending hours and hours of meeting online and offline, but we also know that many of you have done the same exact thing. So thanks for your contribution to kind of make this as successful as it could be. Obviously, there's, as has been said, there's so many kind of differing opinions on how things should go. But I think I appreciate, or we appreciate, the ability of this group to kind of respect one another in the process. I think that's really, really important. Just as a basic ground rule for working together is just respecting one another's ideas and opinions. And I think for the most part, we've done that. We've had some disagreements, obviously, and but we've done that pretty well. So, and then lastly, for me, I've said this to the co-chairs, like I have some new friends, co-chairs, but also other members of the task force, folks that I didn't know from, the next guy in the room or the next lady in the room. So I'm very grateful for the connections that I've been able to make personally with people, from that have very different opinions than me, but there's people out there that I could learn from. I don't think they'll learn much from me, but I will learn from them. So that's it. So thank you.
All right, great, thanks. And thanks also to the DEP staff who've spent a lot of time with us. And, we really appreciate their time, the information, the conversation. So everyone stay tuned. There'll be something forthcoming from the co-chairs. We can't tell you exactly when. As soon as we can, we can hammer out, any final changes to the language. We're still going through the survey, the last round of survey input. We're still mulling over, everything that we've heard and learned in these 4 conversations that we had, 4 different topics over the last 2 weeks. And we will do our best to consider and reconcile all of that and put out to everyone the best framework that we can, that we feel represents and tries to synergize as best we can the many different ideas and viewpoints that we've heard. And then it will be up to all of you to decide whether your organization or you as an individual wants to sign off on the framework or not. We'll provide opportunities for people to comment one way or the other, so that we'll be able to document the different points of view at the end of the day. So that's the next step. We don't have an exact timeline yet, but it should be relatively soon. We're talking weeks, not months. So because we're under a deadline to get something done by the end of the year. So I think with that, we can let everyone go have their dinner and enjoy their evenings.